Okay, I'll go ahead and start, and thank you for having me back. Many of you were here this morning. If you weren't, I'm Paul Dye. I'm one of the lead flight directors I was for the shuttle program, and now I'm one of the flight directors for the space station program. And I actually did space station on and off for a number of years, ever since it was new, but my personal center of gravity was shuttle. Now we have the big difference, which is I've described the space shuttle as a sprint. You could survive anything for 2 weeks. Long hours, long shifts, working every single day. But the space station is a marathon. It's up there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And we have to make sure that we do the right thing and that we don't burn ourselves out. On the space shuttle, if you had a problem with an experiment or a problem with a device, we brought every person we could think of in to work that problem, and we wanted an answer within 10 hours so that we could fix it the next day, because we were going to come home very soon. With a space station, if you have a problem that's not life-threatening, that's not an emergency, if you have a problem with an experiment or a procedure or a maintenance, you say, okay, crew, put it away. We'll send it off to the folks. They'll replan it, and you might see it again in 2 weeks. Because it's a marathon. You don't need to fix everything right away. And that's very difficult for a lot of us that have been in the business for 30 years who always have to fix everything right now. And we're learning to have a slower pace so that we don't burn ourselves out. What I want to talk about a little bit is just that, the differences between shuttle and with Mir and station, and how we do daily operations aboard the space station. So I'm just going to have some pictures which are just pretty pictures of the station. They don't really mean much, and I'll talk pretty much to my notes. ISS operations history started when we started working with the Russians in the early 1990s with the Shuttle Mir program. And as I said this morning, we had the opportunity to work with the Russians, and we were asked, what do you want to do with them? And they had a space station and no shuttle, and we had a shuttle and no station, and we decided that using the Mir as the phase one of the space station program to help us learn how to do those kind of things would be a benefit as we built the International Space Station. So phase one was Shuttle Mir. It was 9 missions, actually 10 missions to the Mir, one of which did not dock. We learned about operating with the Russians. We learned about bringing in international partners. We learned about making sure that everybody got what they needed. And we learned about how to exchange crews, how to do resupply, how to do inventory management. Believe it or not, one of the most difficult things about a space station, it's not like a research ship. A scientific research ship will leave port and maybe go to the Arctic or go off to the Antarctic for 6 months to a year, and when it comes back, they take everything off and put it in a warehouse, and they clean everything, and they reorganize everything, and they start over and put it back on before it goes out again. The space station can't be brought home. So one of the biggest problems we have is inventory management, which is figuring out what's there, what's not, and where somebody left it. We learned that on Shuttle Mir, that many times we have to call a crew member who was on the space station 2 or 3 times ago and say, by the way, do you know where you left that 7/16" socket wrench? Because they need it right now and they can't find it. It never got put away. Sort of like my workshop. My workshop's a lot like that, where I build airplanes and keep track of things, and my wife insists about once a month that we go out and put everything away and start over, because things just keep accumulating on workbenches. Right? So the first part of ISS operations was really before the ISS, International Space Station, was built. It was working with the Mir. The next phase was assembly. When I started work at NASA, right at the time we flew the shuttle for the first time, there were a few people who were working on concepts for a space station. That's how far back it goes. We finally ended up with a design for a station, which then got changed to another design for a station, but it all involved many, many assembly flights. And the assembly phase was something we all looked at with excitement and fear, because it was very, very unforgiving. Many of the large modules had never been mated before they got into space. And a lot of times, like putting together department store furniture, things don't necessarily fit. Everything fit when we were done. It took 30-something missions to assemble the station. And all of the EVAs or spacewalks we needed, as Steve was showing, making connections, doing plumbing, doing electrical. There were some difficulties, but in the end, everything fit. It was quite amazing. So assembly was the next phase. And the last phase is assembly complete or utilization. So it took us 10 or 12 years to build the station, and now we're going to operate it for at least 10 years, I hope. And we're going to operate it by doing science. And I kind of think there are two kinds of science. There is pure science, research, and there is engineering science, which is learning how to keep pumps and fans and computers running long enough to go to Mars and come back. Because it's not simple. Zero gravity has funny little things to it, like grease on motor bearings does not always go where you think it's going to go. A lot of our processes are built around gravity, bubbles and things like that. And when we don't have gravity, bubbles don't go where you think they're going to go, and it interferes with fluid systems. As Steve mentioned, atomic oxygen can do things to the exterior. So there's all sorts of things that we're learning as engineers about how to make the space station and how to make spacecraft work before we commit ourselves to deep space. It's sort of as if the early explorers on the coast of the old world here sailed around the harbor for a while before they set out across the Atlantic. And in a sense, they did, because they went up and down the coasts. And they learned how to make ships work. And they didn't know that that's what they were doing. And finally, they set off across the oceans when they had a ship that could do that. Now, ISS operational philosophy. Basically, we wanted a laboratory. We wanted someplace, I should show you the size of it. And I'll just have these up and you can take a look at them. The laboratory was intended to operate like a laboratory here on Earth. When a scientist comes in to work on the lab, they should not have to make sure that the electricity's on, that the plumbing's working, and that the shades are open and things like that. That should be done by the research center staff so that the scientists can do pure research. And that's the concept behind the station, is we want the ground to operate the space station while the crew does what they need to do research. There are some things we need the crew to do, mostly clean house. Cleaning filters, making sure that things that cooling keeps going because you've got lint and dust that picks up, changing filters, changing all sorts of things that are limited life. But once we get done with that, we want the crew doing research. So the ground operates the vehicle. On the space shuttle, and someone asked this question of Steve, the space shuttle was operated mostly by the crew with help from the ground. The space station is operated by the ground with help from the crew. We don't want to depend on the crew to do that kind of routine things because we need them doing science. So let's talk a little bit about, just to mention the size of it, because I had these pictures. It's a couple football fields long. You basically have all of the modules in a straight line with a few sticking out the sides, and then the long truss with solar arrays on either side. It's quite large, and I am assuming that most of you have had a chance to, because you're aerospace students, have gone outside and watched the space station go over. If you have not, you should do that some night. If you're used to watching a satellite go overhead, you think of it as a little point of light going over. When the station goes over, if the lighting is right, it is an object. You can see the dimensions of it. It is actually something with size, because it really is quite huge. These pictures were made from mosaics because we wanted to get close enough to actually get it. Now, we operate the control center, or operate the space station from the control center. This is the Houston Control Center. This is our new control center, which is actually our old control center from Apollo. We have a very flexible staffing concept. So as I talk about this, you have to realize that we have at the most about a dozen people in the front room, and they have a few people in their back rooms. And then at the fewest, and that's during times of high activity. When it's low activity, like the weekend when the crew has a day off, we might only have 4 people in the front room, a flight director, somebody running the computers, and a couple of system specialists to watch over things. And we do that because we don't want to burn people out. We don't want to make people so tired that they quit and go somewhere else. So people are on call. If we need them, we call them in. Meanwhile, we let computers monitor things. We have automated monitoring. It's a much more flexible staffing concept. So Houston Flight, which is myself, the Houston Flight Director, has overall real-time coordination role. It's our job to make sure that everything's happening. We spend a great deal of our time making sure that everybody is getting their share of the time. And by everybody, I mean US researchers, European researchers, Japanese researchers, Russians, Canadians, everybody who's part of the program has allocations of crew time and commanding time and things like that. So we make sure that everybody is getting what they need. In most cases, this participation, this partnership is working extraordinarily well because everybody has a common goal, which is to make the space station work and to get what they need from it. There's very little competition for time between people or between control centers or between countries. The competition for time comes between having enough time for the crew to do research versus having to do some maintenance tasks or reconfiguration tasks because we've been building the station a lot. It is a collaborative effort between the international partners. Planning is an iterative process. So everybody puts in their requirements. They say, we need to do these, we want to do that. And we write that all down and we say, great, we've got 2 weeks of work and we're only planning 1 week. Okay, what have we got to get done? What's on the priority list? What has to get done before the next increment? We start winnowing it down, and we throw that plan back out there and say, can people live with this? Comes back with, yeah, that's okay, we would have liked to get this, but we can do with that instead, and we'll work on a little bit more. So it's a collaborative, iterative process that starts when we plan an entire increment, which is several months long, and it keeps going down until we make weekly plans. How many flight directors are there? Well, we have, in the US, we have a number of flight directors to fill the one role of Houston Flight, but then we have flight directors in other control centers. We have about 18 flight directors in Houston, but then we have payload operations directors and the Marshall, a US payload flight control center. We have the Munich control center, and I don't know how many people they have, but they have a person. When we have the Japanese have a control center, so we have a Japanese, and then we have the Russians. So we actually have 4 different flights, if you will, that all have to cooperate to make this happen. A lot of times we have problems, well, I won't say a lot of times, but sometimes we have failures that mean we lose science. Sometimes there's systems failures. The ever-popular CO2 removal system. One of the problems you have, of course, in a sealed environment is you have to remove carbon dioxide from the air. And we have several CO2 removal systems, the Russian systems, the US systems, and they're engineering projects, so sometimes they're just not working right. And then we have to take time to do some maintenance on those, and so we lose some science time. Those are the kind of things that happen. And everybody is very cooperative about that, because maintaining ISS capability is fundamental. If we don't do that, we have to abandon ship and the whole program is over. Cooperation is excellent at the working level. It is unbelievable how well it works. Sometimes politics seems to be the governing factor in life on this planet. And it even seems like that when you read the news, that there might be, the Americans have said that they're going to do this instead of that, and the Russians have decided that they're going to put their resources to go to Mars instead of the station, and this and that. That's at the politician level. At the flight director level, we sometimes have to play a little bit of a game, a little poker between people, but seeing how you can trade off resources. At the working troop level, below the flight directors, the trajectory people talk with trajectory people, and the flight planning people work with flight planning people, and the systems people talk with systems people. The cooperation is unbelievably remarkable. They're absolutely open and honest. It just works. And I know that. I know that sometimes if I have to discuss something with my Russian counterpart, it might get into a negotiation over something. So I don't talk to him directly. I tell my trajectory person to just talk to their trajectory person and make it happen. And then they can come back and report back to both of us that we're happy. And then it works. Works quite well. Everyone has a seat at the table when we're working on things. Oh, this was a Christmas picture, I guess. When you spend a lot of time, you kind of make the control center your home. So we do have a few Christmas decorations out. I'll just flash some pictures of the interior, but Steve had betters of those as we went. I want to talk about how the planning process kind of works, but before I talk about that, there is a management layer above the flight directors, of course. There is a rule that says, a flight rule that says that the flight director may take any action he or she feels necessary for the safe and successful completion of the mission. I forgot one word there. He or she may take any real-time action that is necessary for the safe and successful completion of the mission. If we have an emergency on board the station, nobody can tell me what to do if I know what I want to do. But most things on the space station don't work that way. Most things have lots of time. And we work for the Space Station Program, which is a group of international managers. I personally don't care whether experiment A gets time or experiment B gets time. I don't know the difference between those. Those requirements are set for me, and I'm perfectly happy to have that. So if we do have a problem with one or the other, and they're going to be in contention, I then ask management, what's your preference? Which gets priority, A or B? And I ask that of the mission management team. The mission management team are the program managers from each of the major partners, and they meet twice a week, as a rule. They can meet more often if they need to, and they set direction for the program. So it's important to recognize that everybody has a boss. Everybody works for somebody, including the flight directors. So how do we plan things? We have an increment plan for the mission. There's all sorts of little maintenance and things going on all the time. This is the robotics workstation. The increment plan is figured out before an increment launches, and an increment is basically a crew that goes up and spends their time on the station. It's never quite that simple because we kind of change out half the crew at a time nowadays. But for that increment plan, it'll say, during this increment, we are going to achieve these objectives. We're going to get this much science on this experiment. We're going to get so on and so forth and do these things. And that's the overall guiding document. But that has to be turned into a weekly plan. And they do that early on. They line it out. But the basic plan for a given day in space happens 1 week in advance. So 1 week in advance, we want to know what's going to happen. If I'm planning, or if I'm going to execute tomorrow, that plan was built a week ago, and everybody has made their inputs. All the various control centers, and we have a group of planners. That's all they do is they keep the plan going, and they put everything out there, and they look at the plan, and then every flight control team that comes in every control center looks at the week's plan and says, okay, this is what we're going to be doing on Wednesday of next week. Anybody have any problems with that? And the answer is yes. There's always something wrong with it. And it's usually something minor. But, I said that I was going to be using system A for this activity, but actually we've got to give system B some time so its pump can run. So we're going to make that a different change. And then the planners rotate that into the system, and they do that. So the next time we look at that plan is 3 days out. 3 days out, and by the way, on the 1 week out plan, if a person wants to make a change, they simply make a note to the planner, and it's very informal. And if the planner says, look, that's just not going to fit, and they need to get negotiation going, they call me, and then I talk to the partners, and we say, that's not going to work. Or more frequently, I have to talk to my own people and say that won't work. But it's very informal. The 3-day out plan, if you need to make a change, we review the plan for 3 days from now. If you need to make a change, we require that you submit change paperwork. Now, Those of you who are studying engineering haven't probably learned yet about paperwork, except when it comes to exams and homework. But paperwork is what makes a big program go. When you want to make a change, you have to write it down. And you have to write it down on a form or type it in on a form on the computer, more likely, and you have to submit it. And you have to fill all the boxes and all the squares, and it's very tedious. This is one way, this is the first screening process of whether your change is important enough. If it's important enough to take the time for you to fill out the form, then it's crossed that first wicket. Right? A lot of times you kind of go, that's just not that important, we're fine without it. So 3 days out, you have to submit that. And then the night before, the day before the plan is going to be executed, you do one final review to make sure that everything is exactly right. Now, a week ago, you and your discipline reviewed that plan. 3 days ago, you reviewed that plan. Today, we're reviewing that plan, and if there's a problem with it, you need to come to me directly and tell me why you didn't catch the problem a week ago or 3 days ago to justify why you need to make a change. Now, that sounds kind of stern, but you see that I'm smiling when I say that. A lot of times things happen. Something happens to an experiment or something happens in maintenance that we need to work on. The toilet breaks. I don't know about you, but when a toilet breaks at home, everything stops until we get it fixed. Same thing can happen on the station. So sometimes we've got to make a change to tomorrow's plan because the guys have to go do some maintenance that is critical. Then everything else rolls down and we just make it work the next time around. So that's the planning process. The thing that we really, really have to try and stress to people are something that I mentioned earlier, considerations for long-term operations. First, it's a marathon, not a sprint. We're going to be up there for years. Not only we don't want to burn out the ground team, we absolutely don't want to burn out the crew. On a space shuttle mission, like Steve has flown 5 times, 4 times, he never stops working. I mean, they sleep for a short period of time, but it's just nonstop because you can sleep once you land. It's 2 weeks long. You're not going to get to fly in space again for a number of years, so you better work hard during that time. You can't do that every day for 120 days on orbit. So the crews have a weekend. They don't work on Saturdays and Sundays on the space station. As a matter of fact, we don't even call them. We don't talk to them unless they call us on Saturdays and Sundays. I've gone an entire weekend without talking to the crew. It's great. They've got their email. They actually have internet now. They send down videos. They send emails and things. One of the things that they have on board the space station is a telephone. It's an internet protocol phone. And when we have high-rate data, they can pick up the phone, put a headset on actually, and dial the phone, and they can call anybody they want on Earth. Comes down to Houston, goes out into the system, and you'll be sitting there at home, and all of a sudden the phone rings, and it's Dan Burbank, commander of the space station, just calling to say hi. It's kind of fun, actually. And it's not a question of privacy. It's just a question of sometimes that's convenient. When we do training and simulations, sometimes they take away all of our normal communications, and that's suddenly the phone rings, and it's the crew over in the simulator calling on the phone because that's the only communications means they had left. You use what you have to use. Right? So it's something that we try and instill in people in the space station is that life needs to go on. It needs to be a normal life. They need time to look out the window. On the weekends, sometimes I don't think they do anything but look out the window. I wouldn't. Right? It's beautiful. They also need contact with family and friends. You cannot live in an isolated bubble all the time. And so we set up conferences between the crew and their families. Everybody gets a conference on the weekends or whenever it's appropriate. And they can just pick up the IP phone and call and chat as well. So we've learned that you've got to be in contact. Think about the difference between Arctic exploration of 100 years ago and exploration in space on the space station. When somebody left for Antarctica on a wooden sailing ship, first you didn't know if you were ever going to see them again, and there was no expectation that you were going to hear from them again until they made it back to civilization 2 years later. On the space station, you're probably going to hear from your husband or wife pretty quickly. Right? It's kind of nice. The other thing is you've got to make sure when you've got people up there is that they feel useful. You have to have meaningful work, and we try to do that all the time. You can't just let people knock around with nothing to do, nothing meaningful or nothing important. And that's usually not a problem. Most of our astronauts and cosmonauts are so motivated, they're such motivated people, they're asking for more work to do if they're busy, if they're not busy enough. And one thing that we sometimes do is Saturday science. They don't need to work on Saturday, but we always get questions. Hey, isn't there some science I can do on Saturday? And if there's not, they're more than likely to develop their own science project on a Saturday. Don Pettit is up there right now, and Don is one of the most inquisitive people I have ever met. And he's brilliant. A couple missions ago, Don was up on the space station. He invented a gyro-stabilized flashlight. Think about this. You're working deep inside the bowels of something. You're working inside a cabinet, and you take a flashlight in zero gravity, and you put it here, and it just kind of floats away, and it doesn't stay pointed where you want it pointed. So Don took 3 portable compact disc players, and he taped them together with duct tape in an orthogonal pattern, and he taped a flashlight to them. And then he hit play on all 3 discs so that they were spinning in 3 different axes, and he could put it where he wanted it, and it kept the flashlight pointing in exactly that spot every time. Gyro-stabilized flashlight. That's Saturday science. You need to keep the crew busy or they're going to start inventing things. It's important for the ground to recognize that even if you have a crew member like Dan Burbank, who's the commander of the station right now, who is incredibly easy to work with, unbelievably friendly, completely outgoing, wants to do everything for you that he possibly can, he is still under stress. Anybody who's hurtling through space at 24,000 miles an hour, feet per second, 24, see, we do that. The question about units, okay. He's right. But you see, there are many, many reasons why we do that. But I think in mostly feet per second, because that's what we flew the shuttle in. When you're hurtling through space at ridiculous velocities, you are under stress. You are in a can. A lot can go wrong. You have to remember a lot of things. And so we make sure that we recognize that folks are under stress. We try not to ever keep secrets from them. That's a terrible thing to do. If we know something, we talk to them. Matter of fact, we have a weekly session on Friday afternoon when we just hook up in a conference room the space station crew to any flight director that wants to be in the room that day. And we just chat. We just talk. We just vent. Sometimes we really vent in both directions. Other times it's just, hey guys, it's just great to talking to you. Hey, guess what, we brought in this for you to see today, or we'll chide them about sports teams or anything that might have happened. So we just try and keep a good atmosphere and open lines of communication. The other thing is you have to give the crew leeway to manage their lives. You have to let them be flexible. I prefer to build a timeline that says, these are the things you need to get done this week. Get them done whenever you want. There's some things that have to happen on time, but other than that, I just try not to micromanage it. The guys and gals know what they need to accomplish on a given day. The things that are fixed in time based on ground coverage or coordination with the ground, they know that from the flight plan. If they miss something else, if they're scheduled to do cabin filter cleaning, which is clean the house, and we don't see them doing it in the morning, don't bug them. They'll pick it up in the afternoon. They're big people. Okay? Let's see, just the last couple points here. The crew is well trained. They understand the program. They know what needs to get done. They probably know more about their increment than those of us who just kind of pop in once in a while to run things. And they don't need to be micromanaged. The ground teams can burn out as well. I hope that many of you will get a chance, if you don't get to fly in space, to work in a ground team. One of the control centers around the world. We try and take care of our people. Person has a problem, we deal with it. If a person needs time off, we give it to them. Nobody is so important at a particular moment that we can't let them lead a personal life and can't replace them. But we do need to maintain our expertise. We need to make sure that people have meaningful work, that it's interesting, that they are allowed to use their creativity. It's really bad not to let people be creative because they're creative people. I was just going to show you quickly a few of the tools we use. This is a flight planning tool. This is what the flight plan looks like. So, that's right, there's a laser here in there. Oh yeah, there is. Okay, these are the various crew members, and these are the items on the day. There's the timeline. We've got it in Greenwich Mean Time. We have it in Houston time. At least this was a copy of mine. So I usually have Houston time. You can set whatever times you want on there. And these are times that we have communication with the ground. The green one is with our S-band voice. The orange is with high data rate. These blank times mean we have no communication with the station from the ground, which are kind of nice because we get to take a break. And then the color codes are various things which the crew can click on it on orbit, and we can tell that if it's been grayed out that they've completed it. If it's a set of colors, then it might be coordinated with some other activity. This tells you that they were getting ready. This is their pre-sleep time, a daily planning conference. We do that before they go to bed, and then they sleep for 8 hours. So that's a typical day, flight day on orbit. Procedures, I should go back here. If you go to one of these boxes on the computer and click on one of these that has a little notepad in it, it will bring up a procedure which can look like this. And you do all this on the computer nowadays. You don't have paper. You don't have flight plans that are on paper. So typical procedure, we'll have the steps you need. This is a page out of an EVA checklist. It's something I grabbed. This is what the weekly plan looks like. So this is a list of things that are going to happen on any given day. So this is a couple weeks out, and it's basically the shopping list that the flight planners will use to build that weekly plan, or the daily plan. We also exchange a lot of notes in the control center. They're called flight notes, electronic flight notes. In the old days, a flight note was on a piece of paper. There was a little pad. You had to press hard because you made a couple copies. If a crew member or a ground person wanted the crew to do something, they would scribble it on the pad. They'd hand it to the Capcom and the flight director, 2 copies. They'd look at it. They'd read it, and I'd tell the Capcom, read that up. That's really hard to do. The reason we did it was that everybody would know that what was going on. Well, that's hard to do with paper when part of your flight control team is in Moscow, part's in Munich, and part of it's in Japan. So we did it all electronic now. So this is really unique, especially for an old guy like me who didn't grow up with a lot of these fancy tools. Somebody can write a flight note, and instantly it can be seen anywhere around the world. And we can say, hey, we need everybody's coordination on this. I'll say that on the loop. And within 2 hours, everybody around the world has looked at it and signed off on it. And then if it has to do with something that's happening next week on my shift, but I'm not working on console that day, somebody will call me up and say, hey, Paul, we need you to take a look at flight note 49er, 379er, and sign off on it. And if I'm in my office, I'll bring it up in my office, I'll look at it, and I'll sign it electronically. So we use all of these tools nowadays to manage the station. So just the last parting shots. The ISS is an absolutely tremendous accomplishment. When I stop to think about what has been done by this international team, we have built a 1 million pound space station. It's up there every day. Huge amount of electrical capability, huge amount of scientific capability, just doing what it's doing. It does unique and interesting science. I don't know. Everybody has their favorite science. Astronauts, it always seems to have to do with food and liquid floating around in the space. Uh-oh. Thank you, Paul. Was that it? It turned itself off. That's okay, I'm wrapping up. I happen to like the combustion experiments. You get to see little flames in zero gravity, but it's very, very interesting science. The ISS is a laboratory for engineering. Exploration, as we've said, is humankind's destiny. Humans always explore. We always want to know what's over that next hill. What we learn on the ISS, we will take to other planets. If we don't learn the lessons in low Earth orbit, we don't deserve to go to other planets. We need to learn how to keep this habitat running for years. I'm looking at a lot of faces of people who will be operating this thing because it will be up there for quite a while. And eventually we need to learn how to leave this harbor that we call low Earth orbit. As extreme as it is, it's still a quick Soyuz ride to Earth, because once we get out to Mars, there's no way home except a half a year of space flight. So we have to use the station to learn how to live in space. That's all I really have. If you have some questions. Any questions? Getting late in the day. Yes?
You said it's a pretty well collaborative environment.
Yes.
I think from an international standpoint, culture has to come into this. I can see being tensions in terms of different cultures. Have you ever witnessed anything?
Oh, absolutely. Cultural differences. I started working with our Russian colleagues in 1993. Maybe it was 92. And it was a tremendous culture shock. I'm a Midwestern American person. I grew up there, you know, and I like to think that I know a lot about the world, but people have different concepts of time, for instance. You know, when an American is 1 minute late in the aerospace business, well, that's it, we're done, we're not waiting for them. And the Russian concept was like, you know, plus or minus 20, 30 minutes, something like that. It's a cultural, growing up type thing. What really makes the culture clashes go away is once you acknowledge that everybody has the best interest of the program at heart. They may approach the problems from a different angle, but they're all trying to get to the same goal, which is a successful mission. Because let's face it, we're the aerospace community, global, but we're a very, very tiny portion of the overall population of the planet. And we all have to fight for funding, we all have to fight for publicity and approval, and we're all in this ship together. You know, someone said, well, what happens if America stops spending money on the station? Will the Russians just run it? Well, they really can't by themselves. And neither can the Europeans and neither can the Japanese. We all sink or swim together. And it's worked out really well. Any other questions? Yes?
How do you find your position, the American position, in the next years against the Chinese, Indian, European space agencies?
Oh, where we are relative to the Chinese and the Indians?
Yeah.
I have a very simple answer for that. Actually, I'll have Steve answer that question. No, that wouldn't be fair. No. I am a flight operations guy. I fly these things. The decisions on who works with who, that's a political question. They tell me who to work with, we'll work with them. Okay? Yes, in the way in the back?
Yeah, hello. You have talked before about human factors, and my question is, have there been psychological breakdowns? Even you said that you have weekends so that people on the space don't have stress, and even the ground staff also as well. But other people who can't stand the stress, even though?
I can't think of any cases on orbit where we've had any significant problems. We sometimes resentments will build up. Some will get a little bit stressed out, some will on angry, and it's usually because we're not communicating, and then we just have a good talk, and the stress goes away once we realize what a person's problem is. But we've never had a significant psychological problem on orbit that I can remember. And on the ground, it's a lot easier because you go into your boss and say, do not put me on the console for the next month. I need to get away. And so that works. So if you're aware of a problem, of a potential for a problem in advance, you can solve it. And we're very aware that you can have those potentials. We've learned a lot of lessons from exploration over the years.
We try to get our psychological breakdowns out of the way on the ground.
Yes, we try to get the breakdowns done on the ground before they get on orbit. Yeah. Was there a question here? Yes.
This is just about the daily life up there. Is astronaut food so bad, and has it changed over the years?
That's a better question for Steve.
Well, if I had come from Spain, where the food is so excellent, I think I would really not like astronaut food. If I had come from Spain, where I don't know how Pedro feels about this, but the food is really great here, but since I come from a Canadian family who where food isn't a high priority. Space food is great. But actually, to be fair, we have a number of scientists who are food scientists, very well trained and highly motivated, to make the food much better, because it's a significant part of not only your internal chemistry being healthy over time, it's a big part of your psychology. If you're not looking forward to a meal, you won't look forward to spending time with your crewmates, and you might not end up eating the right thing. And if this perpetuates for months after month after month, you will be unhealthy and unhappy, and we can't have that. So it's a very important thing. A lot of people are still working on it, and it's part of the success that we've shown so far. It's also very international. And this is one of the fun things somebody mentioned about the cultural problems. It's of cultural benefit too, and I think it's one of the biggest benefits about having an international space station, as any international effort. That's how the Olympics came about, right? Is that you cross the cultures, you make each other richer by learning about each other's cultures.
That's a good answer. I was going to add one more thing to food. We generally use space food in the simulators if you're doing a simulation for a period of time, and I sometimes go as a crew member as well as a flight director, so I have a lot of experience with the crew. And we'll have an 8-hour training day, and they'll give us space food for lunch. But I'm quite convinced that some of that is they're trying out new recipes. And we have discovered some things that just you don't want to eat. Yeah. But fortunately, you do it on the ground because then you can go out and get some lunch somewhere. We've discovered some real sinkers. Okay, there was a question? Yes?
Yeah, in the last budget, what is the plan for maintaining the ISS? Is it very long term? Is it short term?
Right now, the budget supports maintaining ISS for as long as we need to. You know, I mean, the United States budget cycle is a 4-year type cycle. That's how long an administration lasts. So you kind of have to hope that the plans don't get changed by the next administration. But we have adequate funding to do the research programs that we have set out, and we're using the Soyuz right now for transportation and the progress for transportation, as well as HTV and ATV. And so I think that the budget outlook for ISS is quite good. Anything else? Steve?
Can you talk about mission control? He'll answer. Can you talk about mission control when we have voyages further distant so that you cannot have instantaneous communication?
That's a good question.
Both voice and telemetry.
Yeah. Right now we have it's kind of funny if you, there's a little talent you have to pick up as a Capcom or somebody who's going to speak on air to ground when you're talking to the crew, because there's a little time delay talking to the crew. It's not so much that they're that far away, it's that their voice has to go through a bunch of computers and relays before they gets to you. And if you immediately start talking back to them, you step on them, and then they step on you, and it's kind of funny. But once we start getting farther and farther away, there are going to be significant time delays to how you can operate. And you won't be able to immediately get a response to the tune of, it might be 10 minutes, it might be an hour if you're far enough out. And so we're going to have to make the vehicle more autonomous, and we're going to have to give the crew the autonomy to make decisions for themselves, which we try and do anyways for emergencies. In an emergency case on the space station, I basically tell the crew, okay, this is what we got. Tell us what we can do to help, because if it's a fire or a depressurization, it's all on them. There's very little we can do to help. And so for long-duration missions, we're actually planning an experiment on the space station where we are going to, for a week, we are going to introduce a time delay of, I think it's something like 20 minutes to all communications, telemetry, and commands. And we're going to run it for a week like that as if it were a Mars mission and see how well it works and see what lessons we can learn from that. Because if we have a problem, we can always take the time delay out and deal with it. So we're going to have to learn how to work with the crew being very autonomous explorers, like those people that went to Antarctica a long time ago and they couldn't call back for help. Okay, anything else? Yes?
Well, this is about language. Have you, as a flight director, have to learn Russian to speak directly to your counterpart in Russia?
I wish I would have had the time. They tried to teach us, they tried to get us into Russian lessons, but with all of the things we have going at our job, we never had the time to devote to it. When the crew members learn Russian, you do total immersion, right? Now they do for like 6 months, and that's time that we never have available. So we use translations. We have found that most folks around are speaking very good English in all the other control centers, and we generally just use a translator back and forth to the Russians, even though some of them do speak some English. They generally it's just as easy to just use Russian. And we have very set phrases that we talk back and forth. So a lot of the things that we normally do that on a day-to-day basis, I don't need to wait for the translation because I've learned to hear what they're asking in Russian anyways. But the short answer is no, we don't have any Russian-speaking flight directors. Okay, we'll make that the last question because I'm running out of voice here.
In terms of, I can imagine in a very safety-prone environment, you have to be careful with change. And I know you said you guys are pretty good at it, documenting it and everything, but how change-oriented is the environment in space compared to, like, let's say on Earth? Like there might be to change, like, administration, it's very difficult, but up in space, you might have to act quickly. Do you guys embrace change, and how does that go?
You have to embrace change, but that doesn't mean you have to like it. I have a saying, Steve knows this well, I do not like late changes to a plan. When you make late changes to a plan that was set out in advance, there was probably a reason why it was set out the way it was, and you might not be knowledgeable about everything that went into that plan. And so if you try and make up a change at the last minute, you might mess something up. So late changes are a great recipe for a disaster. In the flying business, we always have a saying, plan your flight and fly your plan. Unless an emergency arises, there's no reason to improvise. If an emergency arises, we are as flexible as you can possibly be. So we have to be resistant to change in order to make sure that we don't do something that makes us less efficient. We have to be accepting of change if the situation warrants. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it.